The first horse stopped chewing before anyone noticed the old cowboy. Another lifted its head, then another. Within moments, every horse in Willow Creek Ranch stood perfectly still, their ears pointed toward the lonely figure walking through the autumn dust, as though they had recognized someone the rest of the world had long forgotten. Before we discover why that impossible moment happened, welcome to our story. If heartfelt Western tales of loyalty, redemption, and second chances speak to you, consider subscribing and riding the trail with us. We'd love to have you beside the campfire for every new adventure. Autumn had painted the Colorado hills with gold. Cottonwood leaves drifted lazily across the winding road leading toward Willow Creek Ranch, where the morning sun warmed weathered fences and broad grazing fields filled with some of the finest horses in the valley. Down that quiet road came Samuel Carter. 71 years had carved deep lines across his weathered face, but they had never stolen the quiet strength in his blue eyes. His faded black cowboy hat shaded thick silver-gray hair, while a worn brown trail coat rested over a faded denim work shirt and old leather vest polished smooth by decades beneath open skies. His boots showed countless miles, yet every step remained steady and purposeful. At his side hung only a bedroll and a small canvas saddlebag. He carried no rifle, no wealth, no pride beyond the dignity earned through honest work. Ahead, Willow Creek Ranch stretched across rolling pasture land. Horses grazed peacefully beyond split-rail fences, while ranch hands repaired gates and loaded wagons beneath the crisp autumn sky. Samuel paused at the entrance. For just a moment, he rested one weathered hand on the gatepost. 40 years spent training horses had taught him patience. Today, he hoped patience would bring him one more chance. Inside the ranch yard, Emily Dawson directed several workers near the large red barn. Though only 34, responsibility rested heavily upon her shoulders since inheriting Willow Creek Ranch after her husband's passing. Her chestnut braid hung neatly over one shoulder as she studied supply ledgers before looking toward the stranger entering the yard. Samuel removed his hat respectfully. "Morning, ma'am?" Emily offered a polite smile. "Good morning." Samuel stepped forward slowly. "My name's Samuel Carter. I've spent most of my life working horses. I was wondering if you might have room for one more ranch hand." Emily studied him kindly. There was nothing threatening about the elderly cowboy, only tired eyes, honest hands, and quiet hope. Before she could answer, another rider approached. Jacob Mercer. His expensive black riding coat stood in sharp contrast to Samuel's faded clothing. His polished boots gleamed beneath the morning sunlight as he dismounted with the confidence of a man accustomed to being admired. He looked Samuel up and down before letting out a short laugh. "You're applying here?" Several nearby ranch hands glanced over. Samuel simply nodded. Jacob shook his head. "I've seen retired soldiers younger than you." A few workers chuckled. Jacob continued loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Look at him. He's too old to handle a horse." More laughter followed. One ranch hand quietly muttered, "He'll need help climbing into the saddle." Another smiled awkwardly, unsure whether to join the teasing. Samuel never reacted. He simply stood with both hands resting calmly upon his old hat. Emily frowned slightly. She disliked the cruelty, but also knew the dangers of ranch work. Long days, heavy lifting. Powerful horses. One accident could change everything. She stepped closer. "Mr. Carter, I truly appreciate you coming. You have an impressive lifetime of experience." Samuel listened quietly. "But I'm afraid this ranch demands work that can be dangerous. I couldn't forgive myself if someone your age were injured here." There was genuine regret in her voice. She wasn't mocking him. She was trying to protect him. Samuel gave a small, understanding smile. "I appreciate your honesty. No hard feelings." He placed his hat back upon his head. "I hope this ranch prospers." Emily nodded softly. "Thank you." Without another word, Samuel turned toward the gate. The laughter behind him faded into ordinary ranch sounds. Hammering, horse hooves, wind moving through cottonwood branches. He reached the entrance. placed one hand upon the weathered wooden gate, and quietly began walking away. That was when something extraordinary happened. One young mare stopped eating. Her ears pointed toward Samuel. A nearby gelding raised his head. Across the pasture, another horse turned completely around. Within seconds, every horse in the nearest field stood perfectly still. The ranch hands stopped working. Emily looked up. Jacob frowned. The silence spread across the pasture. Then, without anyone calling them, the horses began walking. Not running, not frightened. Simply walking with calm purpose, one after another, across the open field, toward the old cowboy leaving the ranch. Samuel heard the approaching hoofbeats and slowly turned. The first mare reached him. She lowered her head gently. Another horse arrived. Then another. Within moments, dozens of horses surrounded Samuel in a perfect circle, standing so peacefully that even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb them. No ropes, no commands, no treats, only quiet recognition. The oldest stallion among them stepped forward. Its once powerful body carried the wisdom of many seasons. It stopped directly before Samuel. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the great horse slowly lowered its head and gently rested its forehead against Samuel Carter's chest. No one spoke. No one laughed anymore. Emily stared in stunned silence as golden leaves drifted softly between the motionless horses. Barely above a whisper, she breathed, "I've never seen them trust anyone like this." Emily's whisper seemed to hang in the crisp autumn air. "I've never seen them trust anyone like this." No one dared move. The great gray stallion kept its forehead gently against Samuel Carter's chest, breathing slowly, as though greeting an old friend after many forgotten years. Around them, every horse stood quietly, ears forward, eyes calm, waiting for something only they seemed to understand. Samuel slowly lifted one weathered hand. With gentle fingers roughened by decades of honest work, he stroked the stallion's forehead. The old horse closed its eyes. A deep, contented sigh escaped its nostrils. Several mares answered with soft nickers. Young colts stepped closer. Even nervous horses that normally kept their distance gathered around the elderly cowboy without the slightest hesitation. The entire ranch watched in stunned silence. Jacob Mercer was the first to speak. "This has to be some trick." His voice sounded far less confident than before. Samuel smiled gently without looking at him. "There isn't a trick in the world that earns a horse's trust." Emily slowly walked closer. "They know you." Samuel nodded. "They remember." She looked puzzled. How could they? Samuel rested his hand on the gray stallion's neck. "They don't remember me. They remember the hands that taught the horses before them." Emily frowned slightly. Samuel looked across the pasture. 40 years ago, nearly every ranch in this valley shared breeding stock. "I helped start bloodlines that still live today." He smiled at a young bay mare standing nearby. Her grandmother learned to trust people before she could even wear a halter. The mare stepped closer as if she understood every word. Samuel chuckled softly. "Horses teach their young many things. They pass along confidence. They pass along fear. But most of all, they remember gentle people." No one interrupted him. Their memory doesn't work the way ours does. They remember voices. They remember patience. They remember how someone made them feel. He looked lovingly across the herd. "And kindness has a way of living longer than we ever do." Emily felt tears beginning to form. Her late husband had always spoken about earning a horse's trust instead of demanding it. Watching Samuel now, she finally understood what he had meant. Ben Dawson came running from the barn. He had heard the commotion but froze the instant he saw every horse surrounding the old cowboy. "Mom, what's happening?" Emily quietly answered. "I honestly don't know." Ben carefully stepped closer. Samuel smiled warmly. "Good morning." The boy smiled back. "Did you train all these horses?" Samuel laughed. "No, I trained a few. The rest simply inherited good teachers." Ben's eyes widened. "Horses teach each other?" "They surely do." They watch everything. If one horse trusts you, the others begin watching. If they discover you deserve that trust, they'll remember. Ben stared at the herd in amazement. I never knew that. Samuel smiled. Most people don't. Jacob folded his arms impatiently. This proves nothing. They're animals. They probably smell oats in his pocket. Several ranch hands laughed uncertainly. Samuel quietly reached into his worn trail coat. Jacob smiled triumphantly. I told you. Samuel pulled out a folded handkerchief. Nothing else. He unfolded it slowly, before placing it back into his pocket. I don't carry treats. I've never needed them. The laughter disappeared. Jacob looked embarrassed, but refused to admit it. Emily stepped toward Samuel. I owe you an apology. Samuel gently shook his head. You owe me nothing. You were trying to protect an old man. She smiled sadly. I still was. But perhaps I judged you too quickly. Samuel tipped his hat. It happens. Emily looked toward the ranch. We could certainly use another pair of hands. Samuel immediately replied. I'm grateful. But only if I earn my place. I won't accept charity. Emily admired the quiet pride behind those words. You'll earn it. Samuel smiled. Then I'll start wherever you need me. That afternoon, Samuel repaired fence rails beside two younger ranch hands. He never complained, never hurried, never tried proving anything. Instead, he simply worked. Every task finished carefully. Every tool returned exactly where it belonged. Ben followed him almost everywhere. So, how do you make horses like you? Samuel smiled while hammering another fence post. You don't. Ben looked confused. You let them decide. The boy thought about that answer for a long time. Late that afternoon, shouting suddenly echoed from the north corral. Several ranch hands came running. It's Thunder! The stallion's loose again! Emily hurried toward the corral. Thunder was the largest horse on the ranch. Powerful, wild, nearly impossible to handle. 3 men struggled with ropes outside the pen, while the enormous black stallion charged from one side to the other, striking the fence hard enough to shake heavy posts. Jacob grabbed another rope. Stand back. We'll force him down. The frightened horse reared even higher. Dust exploded beneath pounding hooves. Workers backed away. One young ranch hand nearly fell against the fence. Ben grabbed his mother's arm. He's going to hurt someone. Emily's heart raced. She had seen Thunder reject every trainer who had ever approached him. Jacob tightened his grip. This time he'll obey. He stepped toward the gate. Before he could open it, Samuel quietly placed one weathered hand on Jacob's shoulder. Please. Let me try. Jacob laughed bitterly. You? Samuel simply nodded. If he says no, I'll walk away. Emily looked at the terrified stallion, then at the calm elderly cowboy. For reasons she couldn't explain, she slowly nodded. The ranch fell silent as Samuel Carter reached for the corral gate. Inside, Thunder stopped charging. The powerful stallion turned, locked eyes with the old cowboy, and stood perfectly still. Thunder stood motionless. The massive black stallion, feared by every ranch hand at Willow Creek Ranch, no longer pawed the ground or lashed his tail. His ears tilted forward as Samuel Carter quietly stepped through the corral gate, closing it gently behind him. Outside the fence, no one dared breathe. Jacob Mercer folded his arms. He's making the biggest mistake of his life. Emily Dawson couldn't answer. She simply watched. Samuel stopped several feet from the stallion. He didn't raise a rope. He didn't carry a whip. He didn't even stretch out his hand. Instead, he spoke so softly that only Thunder could hear. Easy, old boy. The stallion blinked. His powerful muscles slowly relaxed. Samuel took one careful step closer, then another. Thunder lowered his head just enough for Samuel to reach the broad white star between his eyes. The elderly cowboy rested one weathered hand there. The enormous horse closed his eyes. A peaceful silence settled over the ranch. Ben whispered, "He did it." Emily smiled through tears. No. He understood him. Even Jacob's confident expression faded. For the next several weeks, Samuel quietly became part of daily life at Willow Creek Ranch. He never acted like a foreman, never gave orders. Instead, he taught through example. He showed ranch hands how to approach frightened horses with patience instead of force. He reminded them that trust could never be rushed. Slowly, horses that had once shied away from people began walking willingly toward the training pens. Thunder himself became the greatest surprise. The once feared stallion now followed Samuel through the pasture without a rope, stopping whenever Samuel stopped and walking whenever he walked. The younger ranch hands could hardly believe their eyes. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ben sat beside Samuel on a split-rail fence while Thunder grazed nearby. "Mr. Carter?" Samuel smiled. "Yes?" "Were horses always this important to you?" Samuel looked toward the distant mountains before answering. "They became family." Ben tilted his head. "You never had children?" Samuel's smile grew smaller. "I had a wife." The words came gently. "We dreamed of raising a family, but sickness came before those dreams did." Ben lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Samuel nodded kindly. "So was I. But life has a funny way of giving us different paths." He looked toward Thunder. "For me, the horses became the family I still had." Ben never forgot those words. Several days later, Emily climbed into the old ranch office to search for tax records stored in the attic. Dust covered everything. Old ledgers, broken lanterns, weathered saddles. In one forgotten wooden trunk, she discovered several leather-bound journals belonging to her late father-in-law. Curious, she carried them downstairs. That evening, after supper, she opened the oldest volume. Across the first page was written, "Willow Creek Ranch Training Journal, 1863. She smiled softly. As she turned the pages, detailed notes described every horse born on the ranch. Temperaments, bloodlines, training methods. Then one familiar name stopped her, Samuel Carter. Her heart skipped. Page after page praised the young cowboy. "Samuel has a gift with horses unlike anyone I've ever known. The colts trust him before they trust any of us. One day this ranch will owe much of its reputation to his hands." Emily stared at the fading ink. She continued reading. Another journal revealed even more. Samuel hadn't simply worked here. He had helped establish the very breeding program that made Willow Creek Ranch famous across Colorado. Many of the ranch's greatest horses traced their calm temperaments back to methods Samuel had patiently developed decades earlier. Tears filled Emily's eyes. All these years, no one had remembered. The next morning, she visited Sheriff Owen Briggs. The elderly sheriff smiled as soon as she mentioned Samuel's name. "Best horseman I ever met." Emily showed him the journals. Sheriff Briggs nodded slowly. "Those words are true. Why did he leave?" The sheriff sighed. "It wasn't because he wanted to." Emily listened carefully. When Samuel's wife passed away, he couldn't bear staying where every trail reminded him of her. So he quietly packed his saddle and spent the next 40 years helping ranches across the frontier. Emily closed the journal. "No one ever invited him back?" Sheriff Briggs looked out the window. "Most folks forgot, but he never forgot Willow Creek." That evening, Jacob Mercer arrived at the ranch carrying legal documents. He greeted Emily with an easy smile. "I've been thinking. This ranch is becoming expensive to manage." Emily remained silent. Jacob laid the papers across the porch table. "I'll make things easy. I'll buy Willow Creek." She frowned. "We're not selling." Jacob smiled confidently. "You may change your mind. Winter's coming. Repairs aren't cheap." Emily pushed the papers back. "This ranch isn't for sale." Jacob's pleasant expression hardened. "You should think carefully." He climbed onto his horse and rode away. Emily watched him disappear down the road. Behind her, Samuel quietly stepped onto the porch. "You handled that well." She turned toward him, then slowly held out one of the old journals. You built this ranch." Samuel looked confused. She opened to the faded pages bearing his name. His weathered hands trembled. For several long moments, he simply stared. "I thought they'd all been lost." Emily smiled gently. They weren't. They were only forgotten. The following Saturday, nearly the entire town gathered outside the Willow Creek courthouse for the annual autumn livestock fair. Jacob Mercer proudly spoke with local businessmen while ranch owners discussed sales for the coming winter. Emily walked slowly toward the center of the crowd. In her hands rested the weathered journals. Samuel stood quietly behind her beside Ben and Sheriff Briggs. The conversations slowly faded. Emily lifted the oldest journal. Her voice carried clearly across the square. "For years, we believed Willow Creek Ranch was built by men whose names appeared on deeds." She looked toward Samuel. "We were wrong." She opened the journal for everyone to see. The man who gave this ranch its greatest gift was never given the honor he earned. She turned fully toward the elderly cowboy, then spoke words that left the entire town silent. "This ranch still belongs to the cowboy who never stopped loving it." The town square fell completely silent. Emily Dawson's words echoed through the cool autumn air. "This ranch still belongs to the cowboy who never stopped loving it." No one spoke. The old journals rested in her hands like forgotten pieces of history, finally finding daylight. Samuel Carter stood motionless, his weathered blue eyes filled with tears he had spent 40 years refusing to shed. He had never worked for praise. He had never expected anyone to remember. He had simply loved the horses, and somewhere along the way, he had quietly accepted that the world had moved on without him. Sheriff Owen Briggs stepped beside Emily. He removed his hat. "I've known Samuel Carter most of my life. He never asked for recognition. He never complained. But every word written in those journals is true." One by one, the ranchers gathered in the square removed their hats. Even the men who had laughed at Samuel on the morning he arrived lowered their heads in quiet respect. Jacob Mercer stood frozen. For the first time in years, he found himself with nothing clever to say. The truth had spoken louder than pride ever could. Emily walked toward Samuel. She carefully placed the weathered journals into his trembling hands. "They've always belonged to you." Samuel slowly ran his fingers across the cracked leather cover. "I thought these memories were gone forever." Emily smiled. They were only waiting for someone to remember. Several days later, Willow Creek Ranch prepared for its annual autumn gathering. Families arrived from neighboring valleys. Children laughed near the barns. Wagons lined the pasture. Fresh pies cooled beneath open windows. Lanterns hung from wooden fences as the afternoon sun painted the hills with golden light. Samuel spent the morning quietly brushing thunder beneath the old cottonwood tree. Ben joined him carrying 2 brushes. "I figured he deserved both." Samuel laughed. "So do I." The boy grinned. "You know, I've decided something." Samuel kept brushing. "Oh? When I grow up, I don't just want to own horses. I want them to trust me." Samuel stopped. He looked at Ben with gentle pride. "That's a better dream. You can own a horse with money, but trust. You earn that." Ben nodded carefully, storing every word in his heart. Later that afternoon, Emily gathered everyone near the main pasture. She looked toward Samuel. "I have something I'd like to ask." Samuel smiled politely. "You've already done enough." She shook her head. "No, I don't think I have." She stepped closer. "This ranch has always needed someone who understands horses. Someone who understands people." She took a deep breath. "I'd like you to stay." Samuel looked surprised. "As our head horse trainer. But more than that." She smiled warmly. "As family." The crowd erupted into applause. Samuel lowered his eyes for a moment. "I've wandered for a very long time." Emily answered softly. "You don't have to anymore." He slowly nodded. "I'd be honored." Ben nearly shouted with excitement. "I knew you'd stay." Everyone laughed. As the celebration continued, Samuel quietly slipped away toward the far pasture. The evening sun rested low above the Colorado mountains, covering the valley with warm golden light. He leaned against the old split-rail fence. Beyond it stretched dozens of horses grazing peacefully. Samuel smiled. He never called them, never whistled, never raised a hand. He simply stood there. Within moments, one mare lifted her head. Then thunder. Soon another horse began walking toward the fence. Then another. Across the rolling pasture, every horse gradually left the fresh grass behind. They crossed the field together, slowly, peacefully, purposefully. The townspeople noticed. One by one, conversations faded. Children stopped playing. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. No commands echoed across the pasture, only quiet hoofbeats. The horses gathered around Samuel exactly as they had on the morning he first arrived. Thunder stepped forward first. The old gray mare followed. Young colts squeezed between them. Every horse formed a calm circle around the elderly cowboy. Samuel reached out and gently stroked the nearest muzzle. His eyes shimmered beneath the golden sunset. Sheriff Briggs smiled quietly. "I suppose that's all the proof anyone will ever need." Emily slipped her arm around Ben's shoulders. Neither of them looked away. For several peaceful minutes, no human voice disturbed the silence. Only the soft breathing of horses, the whisper of autumn wind, and the quiet understanding shared between a faithful man and the animals who had never forgotten him. The following week, Samuel carried one final possession into the old Willow Creek barn. His worn saddle. The leather had faded from decades beneath open skies. The stirrups bore scratches from countless mountain trails. He carefully hung it upon a sturdy wooden peg overlooking the training arena. Ben stood beside him. "Is that where it'll stay?" Samuel smiled. "I think it's finally home." Outside, the evening sun dipped behind the Rockies. Dozens of horses grazed peacefully across the valley that had welcomed him back. Samuel removed his faded black hat one final time and looked across Willow Creek Ranch. Not as a stranger, not as a forgotten cowboy, but as a man who had found his place again. Sometimes the world becomes so busy chasing youth that it forgets the quiet wisdom carried by faithful hands. But horses never judge wrinkles. They never measure worth by age. They remember kindness. They remember patience. And above all, they remember love. Sometimes the world forgets a faithful man, but the hearts he cared for never do.